seconds to take your seats. Distinguished friends that have joined us today, welcome to the March 9th meeting of the Rotary Club of Louisville. I'm Barbara Sexton Smith, your Vice President, and yes, fellow Rotarians, our President is still AWOL on some high seas, sailing somewhere, but he keeps sending me his waltz words of wisdom, never fear. All right, also, everybody silence your phones, remember to do that, turn off those alarms. And our meeting might run just a little bit long today because we're anticipating a number of announcements and also a great speaker as well as some great Q&A time together. Fellow Rotarians, I want to take just a moment in case you have not read Sparks. I think there's 2 or 3 folks who haven't read Sparks yet this morning. And Delene sent that out, and one of our members who joined our club in 1979, a former president, CEO, and director of Louisville Gas and Electric, has passed away, and that is Bob Royer. And Bob's son, Todd, is also a member of our club. Bob served our community so well in so many ways for so many years. So if we could, I would like us to take just a brief moment of silence. Thank you. May he make his face shine upon each and every one of us. The funeral services are going to be visitation on this Friday. We'll be at Pearson's from 4 to 8, and then the funeral will be at St. Matthew's Methodist Church on Saturday at 11, and following the burial will be in Cave Hill Cemetery. So right now, Rotarians, join to the stage, the one, the only, Ken Salvaggi, who is the general manager of ESPN Louisville, Paul Harris, ×2, mind you, and chair of the Kentucky Derby Festival for our invocation. Ken?
Thanks, President Barbara.
Yes.
Let us pray today for the spirit of peace and compassion to facilitate the cooling of hostilities and strife in the world. We pray for world leaders to emulate our Rotary mission to live lives of service above self instead of hostile hunger for power that creates misery among nations. We pray for world peace to abound and flourish, and that we all live in a world without war. We pray for more peacemakers who help solve conflicts with peaceful solutions. We pray for peace in mind, body, soul, and spirit. We pray for all of us to show compassion, love, and light. And we pray for strength to help those suffering to heal. Amen.
Amen.
All right, thank you, Ken. All right, now to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test is Tim Nicolazzi. Tim, if you would join me up here, please. He's a program analyst at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And Tim is also part of the Partnering for Peace, which is the collaboration between the Peace Corps and the Rotary, along with our longtime member who's been very instrumental in this work, Fred Cowan. And Fred and Tim have recently done the clothing drive, and I think you guys gathered about 300 pounds of clothing, is that right? To send overseas. While we're at it, before the pledge, give these two gentlemen a round of applause.
Naprosto ja хочу сказати добрий день, which means first I want to say hello, good day. І також я хочу говорити про український culture, which means I want to talk a little bit about Ukrainian culture. I'm going to take 2 minutes. So whenever there's a large gathering of people, a celebration, a party, the Ukrainian culture, there's a series of 11 toasts. Tak? Pravda? Which means true, yes. I'm only going to do the first one, and then we're going to do the four-way test and the pledge. So I ask you to raise your glass of tea, of coffee, chocolate cultures, whatever you want. And we're going to say, do zustreч, to the meeting. To the meeting. I також do друзі. To our friends. It does. So what do we do first? Pledge. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the four-way test.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Those are the accolades in there.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you. All right, Rotarians, now it's time to introduce all of our guests. If you would please make your way to the microphone located over here to my left in the back of the room. And Rotarians, remember, introduce yourself first, and then introduce your guest's name, and then guest, when your name is called, please stand up so we will know who you are. And Rotarians, I see plenty of guests in the room, so start making your way while you're finding the microphone. I'm going to introduce two of Kevin Lynch's guests. Hello, fellow Rotarians. This is the time where we allow our guests to let the light shine upon them. All right. As we show respect for all of our honored guests, two guests I'm going to introduce right now on behalf of Kevin Lynch, who is, I don't know if he is sailing somewhere with Walt, but he's not here today. So my first guest is Amos Izermana. Amos, please stand, is the director of the Mayor's Office of International and Immigrant Affairs. And second guest is Omar Ash. Omar is the president of the World Trade Center, Kentucky. Welcome. All right, Rotarians, take it away. Introduce yourself and then your guest.
Where's Brandon? Brandon, stand up. Nope, stand up. Hello, I'm Timothy Nicolazzi. You just heard from me. I work for Housing and Urban Development, and I want to introduce my guest today, Brandon Fisher, our extremely intelligent and hardworking PD&R, which is public policy and research. Analyst. He does a great job, extremely intelligent, great guy to talk to. Thanks. Welcome, Brandon.
Hello, Rotarians. My name is Casey Mayer, President and CEO of Waterfront Botanical Gardens, and I am introducing today Lori K. Scott, the Director of Development at the Waterfront Botanical Gardens.
And I'm Craig Sherman, and by the way, if you haven't seen Waterfront Botanical Garden, it's beautiful. So, my job today is to introduce you to Frank Harshaw. Frank, he was just inducted in the Junior Achievement Hall of Fame.
President Barbara, my name is Rick Harned, and I'm very happy to introduce Destiny McKee, who is an entrepreneur working in the area of motivation, speaking, and coaching, and whom I met last week at a Toastmasters meeting, because Toastmasters and Rotary have an international partnership going.
President Barbara, I'm Fred Cowan. I have three guests today. The first is my wife, Linda, who is a member of the retired attorney, member of the board of Kentucky Waterways Alliance, and a co-founder of Emerge Kentucky. My second guest, and also a guest who is a guest of Kevin Lynch. In fact, if he were here, he'd be introducing her instead of me, but I get the privilege of doing that, and that's Christy Brown. Christy is a philanthropist and founder of Enviro Institute at the University of Louisville. And not only that, she has been behind so many of the good things that have happened in this community for a long time. So we really appreciate Christy. And my final guest, and Kevin Lynch's final guest as well, is Todd Sedgwick. Todd has been here before, I think. Todd is the former ambassador, United States ambassador to the Slovak Republic. And in addition to that, he's, what is, Todd, I forgot your formal title, but with Johns Hopkins University as a fellow, an international fellow. So we appreciate Todd being here today.
Hello, my name is Joan Hannant. I'm founder and CEO of the Soma Institute, and I only have one guest, and he happens to be my husband, Stanley Kozik.
Good afternoon, Rotarians. I'm Cynthia Miles Brown. I'm one of the owners of Sonorama Dixie, and guest today is Elizabeth Matley, and she is the volunteer coordinator for Active Heroes. So thank you for coming today.
Hello Rotarians, my name is Greg Braun and my guest today is Barbara Langford. Barbara used to be a member of the club and guess what? She is reactivating her membership today. Welcome her back.
Well, good afternoon everybody. WilliamTaylor, Executive Director of the club. I'm so excited to have all of you in the room with us today, and I have a couple of people to introduce. Michael Garton is an investment advisor with Advantage Investment Management. And David Galonia is the CEO at Slingshot. Welcome. If I remember correctly, I saw an article recently about your employment of Ukrainians and a t-shirt maybe that you're selling to raise money?
Yeah, we employ about 27 Ukrainians. And
27.
We just, recently did a shirt drive to raise money.
Awesome. Thank you. It's good to have you here. Is there anyone else that's a guest today that has not been introduced yet, other than our speaker? All right. Thank you so much. It's going to be a great meeting. You guys stick around if you can. We'll probably run a little bit long.
All right, thank you all so very much. And I forgot to mention something about one of Kevin's and my guests. Amos, as I mentioned to you, is our new Director of International and Immigrant Affairs. When Amos was in high school, he received the service above self from our very own club, and then he went on to be part of Rotary. So give him a double round of applause. All right, to all of our guests, please, after the meeting is over, we'll have a very brief introduction to what is Rotary, in case you're interested in learning more about how to join the club and be part of us as we fellowship every week together and serve our brothers and sisters across the globe. You'll be able to meet Craig Sherman over at the What is Rotary table, and it's usually to my left over here. Craig Sherman, where are you, buddy? Where are you? Okay, that's Craig.
And the tables are made here.
Okay, he's moved to the back of the room. All right. First shall be last, and the last shall be first. Please go over and find out all about Rotary. Okay, Rotarians and guests, as most of you, if not everyone, know, yesterday we all celebrated International Women's Day. So what I'm going to do is take, thank you. What I'm going to do is take a little bit of latitude here with my time at the podium, and I want to mention a number of Rotarian women who have been in the news and have been nominated for different awards recently. So, did you see that in today's Woman 2023 Most Admired Women Award, there are multiple categories. Look at all these folks. You get to vote for each one of them every day. That's the cool thing about this. So every day go and vote for Nashon Tribute, Morgan Hancock, Whitney Austin, and then we are going to go out on a limb here. Kirk Jacobs' wife, Cynthia Fanning, is also a nominee. Woohoo!
This is a good way to start.
Okay, Kirk, is that you cheering for your wife back there? Okay. Now, they need your daily votes to win. All right, you got that? Now, our club was also highlighted in the Tops magazine for the Leaders of Louisville feature this month. So take a look at that, and look at that fabulous woman over there on the right. You got Jolene. When I saw that photo, I thought, man, who is that professional photographer? And then I realized that's just Jolene naturally turning and letting somebody snap a shot. And then look over on the left. On the cover of Tops magazine was our very own Mayor Craig Greenberg and First Lady Rachel. All right, as we move on, we've got Maggie Harlow not only took home the great big trophy at the Educational Justice Great Bourbon Spelling Bee. Now, I needed that. Did she compete in the spelling bee? Yes. Hot dog, that's exciting. Okay, so she took home the great big trophy, and she was also recognized by the International Sign Association recently as the 2023 Women in Signs Award, honoring women who've excelled in the sign industry. Wasn't that a fun sentence? Kind of set it off. Okay. Does anybody in the room excited about the great big party that's going to be happening that Greg Braun has? Look at Charlie Kastner over there. He can't wait to go. All right, the great big Rotary fundraiser party that our past president, Greg Braun, is planning for March 22nd, okay? Now, in addition to the fun that you've already heard about in the last week or two, we're collecting some pretty unique items for you all to bid on at the silent auction. There's going to be a Rotary President Day. Yes. And if you win it in the auction, guess what you get to do? You're going to love this, Henry. You get to have dinner with a room full of past presidents. Everybody go, ooh-ah. Ooh-ah. And each and every one of them will be one of and among the very best, Christy, past presidents we've ever had. Because each of our past presidents is the best. All right. And then you'll have a private dinner with those folks. Then we're always going to use more. If you all can come up, here's a challenge I'm going to extend to everybody in the room. Think about a fun, exciting thing that you could put on the table to be auctioned off at the silent auction that you'd be willing to take responsibility for providing. Let your minds be bold, just like Louis Brandeis, whom our law school is named after, said. Come up with 4 or 5 more fun ideas. I've been asked to do all kind of things for the silent auction. I'm reserving the right to agree to any of those, Linda, until I hear what everybody comes up with. All right, now, Walto, the golden raffle. How many of y'all, okay, how many golden raffle tickets are we selling? This is how I tell how many people showed up last week. Okay, 111. How much do each of these tickets cost?
$111.
Okay, and why are we selling 111 tickets for $111 each, and the lucky winner will get to choose from one of 4 amazing vacations? Why are we charging 111 and selling 111? Oh, look, only one person did that last week. Gil, we're 111 years old. Not me, the club. Okay. All right, I want to remind everybody that today is the last day to vote on our club bylaws amendment. This is really important. Please go online, you all. I think there's links and emails. And Delane, do we have a link in Sparks to vote on the bylaws, or is it just in the one email that you sent out?
It'll be in the email I'll send out this afternoon.
Okay. You guys and gals, I really want to encourage, it would be wonderful if we had 100% of the club voting on this, because governance is so critical to any organization, and it becomes important when you need it the most. And every word, sentence, and paragraph in our bylaws has been meticulously reviewed by a team of folks. I was honored to be able to participate some in doing that. So I think it's all our individual governance responsibility as members of the club to vote, right? We just don't vote in elections. We got to vote for these bylaws. So please do that. All right, Rotarians, I'm now going to turn the podium over. All right, I'm going to ask Fred Cowan to come to the podium, and Fred's going to introduce our guest. Now, many of you may know Fred as a retired Jefferson Circuit Court judge, but I always think of Fred as the very best Attorney General ever in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. She's a club director, a member of the 1912 Society, and Paul Harris Fellow times 6. Thank you very much. Round of applause for Fred Cowan.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you for all that you do for this community and for our club. I want to start, as I introduce our speaker, by expressing our gratitude to the Louisville Committee on Foreign Relations, which brought our speaker to town and fortunately allowed us and encouraged him to speak to this august group. So that's why he's here today. LCFR's director is Chuck Ziegler, and we really appreciate all he's done to help us out. So, into the introduction. Ambassador William D. Taylor is Vice President, Europe and Russia Affairs at the U.S. Institute of Peace. In 2019, he served as Chargé d'Affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv and as the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine from 2006 to 2009. During the Arab Spring, as you will recall, he oversaw U.S. assistance and support to Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Syria. He served in Jerusalem as the U.S. government's representative to the Mideast Quartet, and he served in Kabul in 2002 and in Baghdad in 2004. In the 1990s, Ambassador Taylor coordinated U.S. assistance to the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. He earlier served on the staff of Senator Bill Bradley. He is a graduate of West Point and Harvard's Kennedy School, and he served as an infantry platoon leader and combat commander in the U.S. Army in Vietnam and Germany. We're truly fortunate to have him with us today, and I'm privileged to be able to introduce him. And as you can tell from his broad experience, he's had an exemplary and distinguished career. In addition to his military experience, he was appointed by every president from Reagan through Trump to his key diplomatic posts. You may recall him playing a critical role in President Trump's first impeachment hearing. As our country's charge d'affaires to Ukraine, he is a witness to some of the key events that led to the impeachment. Described in one news account as extremely careful and credible, and one who took, quote, meticulous notes, his testimony provided a, quote, stunning moment that drew gasps from the audience when he described a video conference call in which an Office of Management and Budget official stated that President Trump had directly ordered a hold on military assistance funds to Ukraine. And this was about a week before the President's call to President Zelensky asking for an investigation into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Throughout his testimony, Taylor was clear, confident, and direct. Appropriately, he did not take sides. Rather, he acted as a patriotic American by simply and courageously telling the truth. No matter what your political persuasion, Ambassador Taylor is an American hero. Please welcome Ambassador Taylor.
Humbled to be here. I am humbled to be here. I'm humbled at that reaction, that reception, that welcome. Thank you very much, Fred. Very kind invitation. Barbara, thanks for having me here. I'm very pleased to be here to talk with you today. I'm going to talk about Ukraine. I am looking forward to the conversation after my remarks. It's always the best part of the time for me is to hear back from you. Questions and concerns and disagreements and this kind of a conversation I think is very valuable for certainly for me and I hope for you. So here we are in Louisville and we've thought a lot about Ukraine and Tim has introduced us using in Ukrainian. Tim, дуже дякую. Why do we care about what's going on so far away? Why is this important to us? Here in Louisville, here in Kentucky, here in the United States, I mean, we've got a lot of problems ourselves. We could be doing other things, and we are thinking about Ukraine. We think about these people who have been attacked, who have been invaded by their big neighbor, their very powerful neighbor. They don't have nuclear weapons, the Russians do. This is a clear example of kind of good and evil. You know. So as Fred said, I fought in a war that was, let's just say, morally ambiguous. This war that the Ukrainians are fighting for us is not morally ambiguous. This war that the Ukrainians are fighting for us will determine the future in the next decades. So this is why it's important to us. More specifically, the Ukrainians are holding off an aggressive Russia. The Ukrainians are doing it themselves. Many of us thought that there would be no chance for the Ukrainians to hold up as long as they have. So I keep track. I keep track of how many days it has been since, so it's 379 days. 379 days. The Ukrainians have held off the Russians, not just holding off the Russians, they have pushed the Russians back. They were surprised. They got some warning and took some measures to prepare, but the Ukrainians were surprised, like all of us, that the Russians would attack them. First time that a European nation attacked another nation since 1945, since World War II, where one nation attacked another nation in Europe to take borders, to violate borders, to take land. President Putin has made it clear that he doesn't think that Ukraine exists. President Putin has made it clear that he wants to take Ukraine back into the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union. He has made it clear that nothing short of wiping Ukraine off the map will suffice for him. This is why I say this is a clear example of a people, of a nation, of a cause that we should support. This, as I said, will determine the kind of world that we live in over the next several decades. Why do I say that? Since World War II, from 1945 until 2014, the world basically acknowledged and respected some principles that helped keep the peace. Talked about peace. There were some problems during the 1945 to 2014 time period. We know those. They weren't big world wars. These principles, respect for sovereignty of nations, respect for boundaries, borders of nations. You don't violate those borders. You don't invade your neighbors. That didn't happen on a big scale for 69 years, 45 to 2014. In 2014, the Russians invaded. The Russians disregarded, tore up those principles. If we're going to get back to a world in which big nations don't invade little nations, then Ukraine has to win this war. The Russians have to be pushed back out of Ukraine in order to reestablish that order, that world order. That's kind of the big picture. It's important for us because if the Russians succeed in wiping the Ukrainians off the map, they will then threaten us. They will threaten NATO, they will threaten our allies, they will threaten the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, they will threaten Europe, and that threatens us. So if we want to live in a world that is more stable, that is more peaceful, that is more beneficial to all concerned, then we have to reestablish these principles of sovereignty and of territorial integrity and peaceful resolution of disputes. This is the kind of the big picture. There's a second reason I think that we care about what goes on in Ukraine, and that is the horrific nature of this war. This is not just military battles. These are not just soldiers fighting against soldiers. When soldiers, Russian soldiers, fight against other soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers win. It turns out that these battles that we've seen over the last 379 days, the Ukrainian military has done extremely well. The Russian military has done extremely poorly. To our surprise. I mean, we have people in Washington out at a place called Langley, the CIA, that's supposed to know what's going on in other parts of the world. And they did a pretty good job. CIA did a pretty good job of forecasting that the Russians were going to invade. They did. A lot of people didn't believe it. But they got it right. They got that right. What they didn't get right was that the Ukrainian military, smaller, much smaller. So keep in mind, Ukraine is like 40 million people or less at this point. The Russians are 140 million people. So the CIA misjudged that contest in two ways. One, they underestimated what the Ukrainians would do. And the Ukrainians, because they're fighting for their land, they're fighting for their homes, they're fighting for their communities, they're really fighting for their existence. I mean, this is existential for the Ukrainians. As I said, Putin wants to wipe them off the map. This is they are fighting so that they can continue to be. And the Russians, those Russian soldiers, they're not sure why they're fighting. President Putin has not been able to give a coherent reason why he ordered the invasion of Ukraine. He hasn't told that story. He hadn't told it to the Ukrainian people, hadn't told it to the world, hadn't told it to the Russians, hadn't told it to his soldiers, and they're not well motivated. So when the fight is between the Russian soldiers and the Ukrainian soldiers win. They pushed the Russians back after the initial invasion. They pushed the Russians way back in the northeast and in the south. They continue to hold strong on that. So the Russians are now bombarding civilian targets with artillery, with guided missiles, with cruise missiles, with ballistic missiles, with air attacks, civilian targets. We've all seen how they go after hospitals and schools. They go, as Ukraine was going into the winter, last fall, the Russians intentionally, they weren't winning on the battlefield, they intentionally went after civilian infrastructure. They went after the electricity grid. I've got good friends. You, Tim, and others probably have good friends in Ukraine. Many people live in high-rise apartments. In Kiev, on the left bank, on the eastern bank, there are a lot of very high-rise apartments. I've got good friends who are on the 17th floor of one. There's another on the 24th floor. If you don't have electricity, when the Russians attacked the electricity grid and wiped out electricity over large parts of the country, not just on the battlefield, but large parts of the country, if you're living on the 17th floor like my friend Alla and her 6-year-old daughter were, they don't have light, they don't have heat going into a very cold winter. Fortunately, it wasn't as cold as it sometimes gets. They don't have water. Electricity runs the water pumps to get water all the way up to the 17th floor. Alla had to walk down 17 flights and fill up jugs, walk back up 17 flights. Electricity, of course, runs the elevators. So if there's no electricity, there's no elevators. But even if there is electricity and there were some rotating blackouts, you're hesitant to get on elevators because if you get stuck in an elevator, it could go for days. It could go for days. This is one example of how the Russians intentionally went after civilian infrastructure, civilians, because they couldn't win on the battlefield. They hoped to bludgeon the Ukrainians into surrender. They hoped to take away the will to fight. That will to fight, again, because they're fighting for their own land, their own existence, their own homes, was very strong, and it stayed strong. And it stays strong. The Ukrainians have not given up, won't give up. How does this end? Where do we go from here? And so let me do that last bit, and then I'd love to take questions. Barbara, you can help me with this. So I don't know how it ends. What I do know is the Ukrainians will not give up. What I do know is the Ukrainian success so far has been due in large amount from our help, from the United States help, and from NATO's help. Other European nations, the Japanese, South Koreans, Australians. This has been an effort put together, led by the United States to support Ukraine. And without that support, they would not be where they are today. If that support continues, if that support, the military support as well as other, but in particular the weapons, sadly to say, what's going to be crucial to end this war, which is what we all want, to end this war, the Ukrainians have to push the Russians out of their country. That's all they want. The Ukrainians just want the Russians out of their country. They're not after, they're not after regime change in Moscow. They're not after, all they want is the Russians out of their country. And if they get the support from us, that can happen. That can happen in 3 or 4 months. That can happen this summer. We can see that happen. That's a possibility. There's one message that I really want to leave. This is not hopeless. The Ukrainians have shown this is not hopeless. There is a real possibility that with the support that we've given so far, and a little bit more soon, like within the next month or two, that they can win. They can win, meaning push the Russians out of their country. That can happen. Now, there's another scenario, and the other scenario is we get tired, and the Europeans get tired, and we don't provide that support. And we've all heard on the news, we've heard people talking about how there are other priorities, and haven't we already done enough, and how long can this go on? And so we have to, if we think that this is important to support the Ukraine, if we want this to be a shorter war rather than a longer war, we have to continue that support. Because without that support, it will grind on. It will grind on. It might grind for a year. It might go longer than that. The fighting might grind down because both sides, I will tell you, both sides are exhausted. We can think of North Korea, South Korea. That war ground down. Didn't end in a treaty. It just stopped. And, it was the truce. It was a ceasefire. And the South Koreans, by the way, they developed themselves. They developed their economy, their governance, their democracy after a while, and they made a successful country of themselves. The 80% of Ukraine that's not occupied now by the Russians can do that too, in this long, grinding scenario. I hope that doesn't happen, because that will lead to more people dying than the short scenario. We want to end this war soon. We need to continue that support. That's my message here, and I'm so glad to be able to give you that message. I'd love to take your questions, because there are probably some people in this room who disagree or want to challenge or ask further questions. So please, I'd love to Barbara.
All right, thank you so very much. All right, fellow Rotarians, this is the time in our meeting, and we have plenty of time left together to come to the microphone. And as you're coming to the microphone, remember, we have rules for the Rotarians. Yes. Well, no, we have opportunities that are guidelines to show your very best self in front of a room full of friends. Okay, here they go. Remember, it's Rotarians only are asking the questions, 30-second time limit. And the questions, now remember, Rotarians, last week I gave a lecture on we don't give speeches because we have a featured guest, a really important guest that came and gave wonderful remarks. Thank you for that. And then return to your seat after you ask the question. And yes, introduce yourself and then ask your question. It's all yours.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm David Graves, and my question is, often I see in the news how many billions of dollars we're helping out with Ukraine. When we send $1 billion worth of military aid to the Ukraine, how much of that is actually military equipment that was built in the United States, and the dollars and the jobs and everything are staying here?
David, it's a great question. So we have been very generous. I will say this. We have been very supportive of the Ukrainians, and that's why they've done as well as they have. The kinds of assistance that we provided, about a third of it has been military assistance in terms of weapons, which are manufactured by and large here, probably in Kentucky and other places around. But the reason that we're doing is not the jobs, that's a benefit, but the reason we're providing is because we want the Ukrainians to win. We don't want the Russians to win. We want the Ukrainians to be able to push the Russians out of the country. Another third is keeping the Ukrainian government going, is funds to keep paying the teachers and the healthcare workers, and to keep the pensioners from starving, because the Russian attacks on Ukraine have crushed the Ukrainian economy. 30% down. So the Ukrainian economy is down 30% from where it started because of this destruction. So we are helping them to stay alive, to keep going, to keep providing that. And the reason that we do that, again, there are some benefits certainly to manufacturing, but we do this because we want Ukrainians to reestablish these principles, these rules that I talked about in terms of respect for borders and respect for sovereignty of nations. But it's an investment. President Zelensky, I haven't talked a whole lot about him, but he came to the United States 2 months ago, spoke to the Congress, and he addressed this exact issue. He said, you know, first of all, thank you. President Zelensky was the reason he was in this country was to thank us for that support. Second thing was that this is an investment. This is an investment in your own security, as I've tried to describe, and it will pay off. It will pay off. Thank you, David, for that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Neville Blakemore. 2 questions. The desire for Ukraine to join NATO, considering Napoleon and Hitler and all the attacks that have happened to Russia over the centuries, was that a mistake? Was that an overreach and just basically getting too close to Russia's backyard? And then number 2, part of a solution at the end, returning Crimea to Russia back from the 1950s when Khrushchev gave it over to Ukraine, is that part of the solution? And is there any way to avoid sort of a North-South Korea kind of situation? So 2 questions, NATO and...
Got it. I had to write them down because I didn't want to forget. Thanks, Neville. So NATO. NATO is a successful military defensive alliance. It is only so I served at NATO from 1987 to 1992. It goes back a ways, I know. NATO has always been a very successful defensive alliance. It's been very clear. When the Soviet Union disappeared in 1991, 1992, and some nations that were part of the Soviet Union were suddenly free, other nations who had been dominant in the Warsaw Pact, who had been dominated by the Soviet Union, were suddenly out from under the Russians, the Soviets. They, knowing what the Russians have done for 300 years, which is to expand, which is to colonize in some real sense, which is to oppress the people on their borders, those East Europeans said, how are we going to defend ourselves? We're the East Europeans right next to the Russians, how are we going to? And they asked to join NATO. NATO at that time was 16 nations. Now it's 30 nations because nations have said, how can we be sure that we're not going to be invaded? How can we keep the peace? Let's go back to this. This is NATO has kept the peace until 2014. So that gets to your question about Ukraine. And the question is, how can Ukraine be secure? It seems to me there are 2 ways. One is to actually have them join NATO, a defensive alliance, no threat to the Russians. The Russians would like, President Putin would like for people to believe that the Ukrainians are being set up by NATO, set up by the Americans to challenge or threaten or invade Russia, which is of course ludicrous. It's of course ludicrous. Ukrainians would like to be part of that alliance so that they can be secure, like the Lithuanians and the Latvians and the Poles and the Romanians. So do I think that caused this war? No. I think there was a legitimate reason for the East Europeans to join NATO. I think there's a legitimate reason for NATO to consider it, to ask for it, to see how the only other way for Ukraine to be secure, if it's not in NATO or until it joins NATO, is to be able to defend itself. And that's kind of what we're doing now. I mean, we are providing Ukraine the ability to defend itself and the ability to push the Russians back out of their country. And if we continue that and allow the Ukrainians to be strong enough to deter another invasion, that could provide their security that they need. Crimea. So again, these principles are important. The principle is nations are sovereign within internationally recognized borders. The internationally recognized border of Ukraine, since 1991, so for 32 years, 32 years, has been clear, and it includes Crimea, because as you said, Neville, within the Soviet times, within the Soviet Union, the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic gave the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1954 Crimea. And the agreement in 1991, when the Soviet Union disappeared, imploded, was that all those borders would stay, that no one would recontest those borders. So those have been the international recognized borders. The principle that we've lived by, that has kept the peace, has been the ability to count on, be confident in sovereignty and territorial integrity. So that includes Crimea. Now, last thing on Crimea. The Ukrainians have said that they want to take back every square inch of Ukraine territory, as recognized by the international community in these borders. But they've said some of that taking back will be what they're doing now, militarily, pushing the Russians out. Some of that taking back could be done, the Ukrainians have said, diplomatically. That is, through negotiations. If the Ukrainians can push the Russians back out of most of Ukraine, back into Russia, and if then that's followed by some negotiations, the Ukrainians have indicated previously, I don't know if they'll still agree with this or not, but they've indicated they're willing to talk about over what period of time Crimea comes back to Ukraine. There's been talk about demilitarization, taking all the military forces, Russian military forces, out of Crimea and not putting Ukrainian military forces in their place. So demilitarize Crimea for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Figure out over that time how it comes back. The Russians might agree with that. The Ukrainians might agree with that. The Ukrainians won't give up claim to it. They will always say, that's Ukraine. Crimea is, they say that all the time. Crimea is Ukraine, which is of course true, and the world recognizes that. And that principle is important to maintain. And please, go ahead, Neil. Yeah.
How does Putin save face? I mean, nice principle, but you know.
Nice principle. So I've talked about nice principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, but some people worry about Putin saving face. I don't worry about Putin saving face. So President Putin has gotten himself into this bind. He recognizes, we were talking about this earlier, he recognizes a blunder, a horrible mistake. Russia is so much worse off now than it was a year ago. So much, think about it. It's a pariah. Its economy is hammered. It has unified the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have never been as unified as they are today. Both directions, both top down and bottom up. President Zelensky has such support from the Ukrainian people, and the Ukrainian people so much support him that Putin has generated on his border a hostile nation that hates him and will for generations. And he's unified Europe. Who thought Europe would stick together? Who thought the United States would be able to lead this international coalition again? Who thought NATO would stick together? Now, it's not only stick together, it's probably going to be 2 countries bigger. The Russian economy is being hammered by sanctions, which are probably going to stay on even after that breakthrough that I talked about, that solution that I talked about. So he's ruined his army. He's ruined his army. His army's lost half of the armored vehicles in their whole inventory. So Putin knows he's made a mistake. He knows he's blundered. He has to find some way out. And he'll find a way. He will find a way. Or somebody in Russia will show him the door and show him a dacha out on the outskirts of Moscow. That's the Russians' problem. And I think that's his problem. Sir.
Ambassador Dan Hartledge, thank you for your service, first of all. Could you talk a little bit about various scenarios that are out there about how this could, expand, or the war could expand outside Ukraine, how NATO countries, this country, could get pulled into it directly? Just kind of walk through those scenarios and then what good could come out of it and what bad could come out of that.
I think it would be mostly bad if it expands in that direction. And the only way Dan, that I can see that happening is if President Putin makes another very bad decision. He's made bad decisions, so we can't rule this out. But if Putin were to attack Poland, because there's a lot of equipment coming through Poland going into Ukraine, and so you could see how he might make a mistake. It would be a terrible mistake if Putin were to attack Poland, a NATO member. That would be his end. There's no doubt that would be his end, but that would be an expansion. It would be a clear expansion because if he attacks a NATO member, all of NATO will respond, including the United States. And this is why I think it's in our interest that the Ukrainians win, that the Ukrainians are given the capability to win meaning getting the Russians out. It's very straightforward. It's important that the Ukrainians do that with our weapons and our support. That's important because we don't want it to expand. We really don't want it to expand. Neither does Putin. Putin knows that it would be disastrous for even beyond the blunders. It would be disastrous. I don't think Putin is crazy. I don't think he's suicidal. That would be a suicidal step if he were to expand it to Poland or any other NATO nation. Sir.
Ambassador, thank you so very much for the very detailed and fascinating presentation. My name is Rick Harned, and I have seen in the news sources assertions that the United States and our allies in the Gulf have captured significant amounts of munitions being sent from Iran to Yemen, but that none of these are available, but none are being given to Ukraine. And I wondered, are those assertions accurate? And if so, is there a reason for that?
So, Rick, good question. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. I do know that the U.S. Department of Defense, our Defense Department, is looking urgently, seriously around the world for ammunition that the Ukrainians can use. And so the question is whether or not some of these, I've heard seen the same stories about the Iranians shipping weapons to, but we know the Iranians are shipping weapons to the Russians, but there's also these stories about within the Middle East. I imagine, I talk to my friends at the Defense Department regularly, and I know there's a woman there who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, who's responsible for finding weapons for the Ukrainians and getting them there. She's looking at that. If it hasn't gone yet, it might be it's the wrong kind of equipment. But if it's the right kind of equipment, we should consider that. I think that's exactly right. Thanks, Rick. Sir.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. My name is Roland Blahnik, and I've heard that at the breakup of the Soviet Union, there were assurances given to Ukraine that the United States and Russia would guarantee their security if they gave up the nuclear weapons within Ukraine. And I don't know if there's truth to that or not.
There is truth to that. It is 100% true, Roland. I'm glad you raised this. And I will tell you that all of my Ukrainian friends know the details of that incident. And so what it was right when the Soviet Union disappeared, imploded in 1991, the next couple of years there was a lot of work to be done on how to deal with the dissolution, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, because there were 4 components of the Soviet Union that were now independent countries: Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine, that had nuclear weapons on their territory, had Soviet nuclear weapons on their territory. And so the question is, we're worried about that. We're worried about who controls those weapons. And the Kazakhs and the Belarusians agreed to give their weapons back to the Russians. So that consolidated those. Ukrainians, not so fast. Not so fast. The Ukrainians know the Russians better than we do. And they were worried about their security. And there was a strong movement among Ukrainians in 1992-93, to keep these nuclear weapons that were on their soil at the breakup of the Soviet Union. And the United States, I have some friends who were part of this effort. We put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians, I will tell you. We put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians to give up these weapons, to consolidate them back in Russia, so that they wouldn't be loose and they wouldn't go to terrorists, and that they would be under control of some kind. And that was fair, that was a good effort, but the Ukrainians wanted some kind of guarantee. They want some kind of security guarantee. They said, look, if we give up our nuclear weapons, it turns out that was the third largest arsenal, nuclear arsenal in the world, after the United States and after Russia. The Ukrainians were the third largest. And they said, if we give up the third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world, what are you going to guarantee us? How are we going to be sure we're not going to be invaded, or our territory is not going to be violated, or our sovereignty is not going to be taken away from us? How are you going to be? And the United States, Great Britain, and Russia signed an agreement. It's called the Budapest Memorandum. It's called Budapest Memorandum, and every Ukrainian knows this. Every Ukrainian knows this story. They remember the Budapest Memorandum, and because it said the Ukrainians will give up their weapons if there is a guarantee of security, territorial integrity, sovereignty, guaranteed by the Americans and the Brits and the Russians. Now, we get this question because it was not a treaty, and so when it's a treaty, we all know about it. Well, this was not a treaty, and the American diplomats, and I know a good friend of mine helped negotiate this, and he's very clear. He's a former ambassador to Ukraine, and he's very clear in that negotiation that this was not a treaty. This was not a commitment that he and the State Department, the President, was going to send to the Senate to get 67 votes. That wasn't going to happen. So instead of a guarantee, what the Americans thought we had promised was an assurance. Not much difference, and the Ukrainians are not interested in that difference. They wanted a guarantee. They thought they had a guarantee, and they gave up their weapons for a promise that they wouldn't be invaded, that their security would be guaranteed. We know what happened in 2014 when they were invaded. So we've gone back on that, and the Ukrainians, they pointed at it. That's one of the reasons, actually, I believe, that we, United States, but also the Brits, that's one of the reasons that we're committed to supporting the Ukrainians, because we had that obligation, and we still ought to honor in some way. Sir.
Ambassador, thank you for the presentation. You stated that Putin showed his true colors by absorbing adjacent properties in, I've forgotten what year. I'm assuming you're referring to Crimea.
Well, you're talking about the Russians expanding. I'm talking about from when about the 14th century.
No,
there was this little Moscow.
Currently, I assume you're talking about Crimea. That's leaving out there, taking over property in Georgia.
I'm sorry, continue the question. I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, this is a statement, I think.
Yeah.
Your state that Putin has been jumping on property earlier than that by going into Georgia?
Yes, he did. Putin invaded Georgia in 2008, right after a NATO summit where the Georgians and the Ukrainians asked to become members, and the Germans and the French said no. Putin noticed that. He noticed that the NATO was not going to defend Georgia and Ukraine, and he invaded about 3 months later. So yes, that he invaded Georgia in 2008.
But my question is, according to Brown University, we spent $2+ trillion in the 20 years in Afghanistan and Pakistan. If you divide that by 20, that comes down to about the amount of money that we've put into Ukraine, with no loss of American service personnel. How do we convince our government to give them more clout than they're giving them and push the damned Russians out of there?
There you go. There you go. It is an investment. You're exactly right, and President Zelensky is exactly right. This is what we should do. This is what he's recommending. To be fair, this administration is providing, as we talked about, the first question was, a lot of money is going into Ukraine. A third of it is weapons. I would agree, actually, that we should be doing more. There are a couple of more weapon systems that the Ukrainians could use, have asked for, that we haven't yet provided to them, that we should. And I believe we will. I believe the administration will get there on these weapon systems to allow the Ukrainians to do exactly what you said, and that is push the Russians out of their country. That needs to happen. I think we will get there. What do
I'm
you
just
think?
concerned that Ukraine doesn't have the manpower and Russia's going to attrite them.
So this is, right, so the question is, the Ukrainians have the staying power, the manpower, or will the Russians be able to outlast them? This is why, when I talk about these two scenarios, there's the short scenario and the long scenario. The short scenario is where the Ukrainians get the support from us. Within the next 3 months, they push the Russians out, and then they sit and negotiate, maybe on Crimea. That needs to happen now because a long, drawn-out fight, war, stalemate, frozen conflict, disadvantages the Ukrainians for the reason that you said. Up until now, I will say, up until now, the Ukrainian people, men and women, have been at the recruiting stations daily. I mean, there's not a shortage of fighters. Again, men and women are on the front lines, and they haven't had it, but that can't last forever, clearly. And again, the Russians have 140 million Russians, and the Ukrainians have now less than 40 million Ukrainians. That doesn't favor the Ukrainians over the long term. So you're exactly right. I support your point about pushing them out. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Julie Schmidt, and my question kind of dovetails with his. First, I was just curious if you felt the other European countries were fully invested, could they do more? And then secondly, I understand we have aircraft ready to go. When are they going? That are available. F something or others that are available.
Right. So F-16 is that we're talking about. Yes. So first on the Europeans, Julie. A very good question. I will say, even though the dollar volume of the assistance, both on the military side and on the humanitarian side and on the financial side, on energy, helping them help the Ukrainians on energy, the dollar volume, we have been very generous and very supportive, and I hope that continues. Europeans are not far behind in terms of the kinds of things that they're doing, and they're providing a lot, nowhere near the kinds of weapons that we are, but that's what we should do. The Europeans have stuck together. There was a lot of concern at the beginning of this war that the Europeans, indeed going all the way back to 2014, there was concern that the Europeans would get tired of these sanctions that, because these sanctions don't only hurt the Russians, they hurt the Russians the most, but they also hurt the Europeans, they hurt us, the energy prices go up, so the worry was the Europeans won't stick, but they did, they have. So I give them great, I hope they continue, because in order for this short war, short scenario, a victory by the Ukrainians breaking through the Russian lines with our support and the European support has to come. F-16. So yeah, there's a debate, and again, same kind of question that you asked about the support and should we be doing more? Yes, we should be doing more. The F-16s are a very sophisticated weapon, not the most sophisticated aircraft, and there are a lot of them out there. And so I bet, well, what I know is there's a debate within the administration, within the government, about when and how to provide F-16. I also know that there are a couple of Ukrainian pilots who are already in the United States training on F-16. That tells me that there's a decision coming. They need to be soon. The F-16s, however, will probably not in the fight, if you will, in this short scenario, right now, with the breakthrough. The breakthrough right now is going to be with the weapons that are already in Europe. And there are a lot of tanks already in Europe, not ours, but European tanks. Those are already coming into Ukraine. Ukrainian soldiers are already being trained on those European tanks, the Leopards that the Germans make. Those are what's going to be in this next fight. The F-16s, And our tanks, the Abrams tanks that we heard about, those will be in the next phase, which is to how to deter, stop the Russians from another invasion, again. So it's what we need them to win now. We want them to win now, so it's short. The killing stops. And then we need them to be strong enough to deter another one. So that the FCTs will come in that one.
All right. Oh my goodness, thank you so very much. You can tell this group's not wanting to go anywhere. We could ask for dinner to be served and stay here all afternoon with you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, you and I have a few little logistical things to do, and yeah, just take your cues from me. This will roll quite naturally. Okay, so now, first, let it be known that the Rotary Club of Louisville, we are the 14th largest club in the world out of 47,000 clubs. Amazing. And how old are we? 111. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I wanted to ask a question. All right, so our club came together a couple of years ago and formed the West Louisville Housing Initiative. And this is an initiative that has never been done, the type of financing model that we have created and put together. Our membership is raising amongst ourselves $5 million. The Park Community Federal Credit Union is going to be putting in an additional $3 million as we hit certain benchmarks. Why? Because we are going to help a minimum of 63 first-time homeowners in this community in the 9 neighborhoods of West Louisville own their own home. And we are making a $500 contribution in your name, and you have a beautiful, suitable for framing certificate. Okay, and if that is not exciting enough for you, in this cellophane wrap, I have something that's a tradition that we Rotarians do when we travel. But you sort of travel to us, so we're going to go in reverse here. We take our Rotary Club flag, and we have an exchange of flags. Hey, Rotarians, how many of you have ever done a flag exchange? Oh, wow, exciting. Okay, so we have decided, well, Delene and I, unilaterally, without a vote, it's not in the bylaws, so we can do this. Vote for the bylaws today, Rob, the amendment. You get a Rotary Club of Louisville flag. And wait, and you're thinking I need a table to set things on. Now, this is what they all stay for. Yeah, the door prize. So you get to draw. We're going to give away 2 tickets to the party at DePaul.
So do I pick 2?
Yeah, well, no, pick one, I believe.
All right.
And do you want to read the number?
Glad to.
Okay.
Check your tickets. 24205667. Okay.
Oh my gosh, it's never happened in the history of the club. The first number read, they're actually here. Okay. All right, she wins 2 tickets to day party at DePaul. It's a big celebration. Now, you get to draw another ticket since that worked so well. You're doing great. Are you going to come back? Oh, excellent.
Okay, this one is 2420565. Oh
my gosh, it's Greg Cowan. All right. Okay, that was very exciting. And since you're doing such a nice job here, hold this up. We have. Oh my gosh, you're such a good sport. Delene has an entire stack of Topps magazine up here, and it's not because her picture is in the back of it somewhere. It does have our First Lady and our Mayor, and it is also suitable for framing if you'd like to pick one up. You can keep that if you would like. Of course. What are you going to say at this point? Okay, thank you so very much. Another round of applause for our speaker. Oh, for heaven's sakes. All right, very quickly, Rotarians, as we wind down our last few seconds together. Next week's meeting is the one of a kind for our unsung heroes, so please make sure you register when you get the link from Delene by 12 noon on Monday for that meeting next week. And then, for all of our guests, Our president, who I mentioned earlier, is AWOL. He does these Walt's Words of Wisdom at WWW each week, and I realized he goes and finds things that other people say. So y'all can look at those if you want, but in true Barbara fashion, I'm going to close the meeting with a couple of Barbara-isms. And I like to think about these while the meeting's going on. So, why in the world does somebody invade another country? All I got to say about that in honor of our President Walt. He is a Shakespearean scholar. For those of you that don't know that about Walt, he would appreciate it that I said this about the invader. So oft it chances in particular men that through some vicious mole of nature in them shall in the general censure take corruption from that particular fault right out of the bard himself. I don't know which play or act, but there you go. And then the other little Barbara-ism that I will give you is really not my words, but it is so apropos. Why? What do I do today based on what we've heard? What are you going to do today based on what you've heard? Ask yourself these three questions. What do I want? What is the truth? And what am I willing to do to get it? And why? Because no one is an island entire to themselves. Each is a part of the main. Everyone's death diminishes me. So do not sin to ask for whom the bell toll. It tolls for thee.